Marcus Chen thought he'd hit the jackpot when he moved into the rental house on Maple Street. The landlord had mentioned the hot tub in the backyard almost as an afterthought, but for Marcus, a software developer who spent 12 hours a day hunched over code, it was the deciding factor. After 3 months of punishing deadlines and stress-induced insomnia, those nightly soaks had become his sanctuary. What Marcus didn't expect was the electricity bill that arrived on a frigid February morning. $473. He stared at the Pacific Gas and Electric envelope, convinced there'd been a mistake. His previous month's bill had been a reasonable $82. He lived alone, worked from home, and his biggest energy draw was his gaming setup. Even running his computer 24/7 shouldn't have quintupled his electric bill. Marcus immediately called PG&E, spending 45 minutes on hold before reaching Janet, who spoke with the weary patience of someone who'd explained utility bills to confused customers for decades. Sir, according to our smart meter readings, your home consumed 1,847 kilowatt hours last month. That's consistent with running several high-energy appliances continuously. But I don't have high-energy appliances, Marcus protested. Just normal stuff, refrigerator, computer, some lights. Well, sir, something your home is drawing significant power. I'd recommend having an electrician inspect your property. That weekend, Marcus called his cousin Tony, an electrician who owed him a favor from when Marcus had built his contracting website for free. Tony arrived Sunday morning with his toolkit and a knowing smirk. Let me guess, you got sticker shock from your electric bill? Tony chuckled as he pulled out his digital multimeter. Happens more than you'd think. Usually it's an old water heater or faulty wiring. They started in the basement, checking the electrical panel. Everything looked normal. The water heater was efficient and relatively new. But when Tony began tracing the main electrical lines, his expression shifted from casual confidence to puzzled concentration. This is weird, cuz you've got way more electrical draw than this house should have. Tony followed the main line as it snaked through the basement ceiling toward the back of the house. Where exactly is this hot tub of yours? They walk outside to the wooden deck where the 6-person spa sat steaming invitingly in the morning cold. Tony popped open the side panel and immediately whistled low. Marcus, when did you say you moved in? October. Why? And the landlord said the hot tub was included? Yeah, he mentioned it was already hooked up and ready to use. Said the previous tenant had installed it. Tony was now crouched beside the spa's electrical connection, his flashlight illuminating a tangle of wires that definitely didn't look professional. Buddy, I think I know why your electric bill went through the roof. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? This hot tub isn't connected to your house's electrical system. Tony stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. These wires are running under your fence line. Unless I'm completely wrong, and I hope I am, your hot tub is stealing power from your neighbor's house. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For the past 3 months, while he'd been enjoying his therapeutic evening soaks, someone else had been paying for the electricity. Worse, whoever had rigged this setup had done it deliberately, running concealed wiring under the property line and what was clearly an intentional theft of utilities. Are you sure? Marcus asked, though Tony's grim expression already provided the answer. Let's follow these wires and find out exactly whose power you've been using. Story outline, remaining parts. Part 2. The investigation. Marcus and Tony traced the stolen electrical connection to discover it's tapping into the power supply of Mrs. Eleanor Hoffman, an 82-year-old widow living on a fixed income. The revelation devastates Marcus as he realizes the elderly woman has been unknowingly subsidizing his relaxation for months. Part 3. The confrontation. Marcus must face Mrs. Hoffman to confess the situation. Despite his innocence in the setup, he feels morally obligated to compensate her. However, Mrs. Hoffman's adult children arrive and threaten legal action, believing Marcus deliberately stole their mother's electricity. Part 4. The investigation deepens. Determined to clear his name and find the real culprit, Marcus investigates the property's history and discovers his landlord, Rick Castellanos, has been running this scam across multiple rental properties. The energy tax scheme has been stealing thousands from unsuspecting neighbors. Part 5. Justice and resolution. Marcus gathers evidence and works with local authorities to expose Castellanos' fraud ring. The landlord faces criminal charges while Marcus helps organize restitution for all affected neighbors. The experience transforms Marcus from a passive tenant into a community advocate, and he forms an unexpected friendship with Mrs. Hoffman while ensuring she receives full compensation for her stolen electricity. The stolen electrical wire disappeared under Marcus's back fence like a guilty secret. Tony grabbed his wire tracer from the truck, a device that could follow electrical current through walls, underground, and around obstacles. The steady beeping grew stronger as they moved along the fence line toward the neighbor's property. This is bad, Marcus, really bad. Tony's voice was grim as he watched the signal tracker. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This wire is buried about 18 inches down, properly insulated. This wasn't some amateur job. They followed the signal around to the front of the neighboring house. A modest blue Craftsman with a well-maintained garden and a small Honda Civic parked in the driveway. The electrical trail led directly to the home's main power supply. Marcus felt sick, so every time I've been in that hot tub, someone else has been paying for it. Tony knelt beside the neighbor's electrical meter, his detector beeping frantically. The connection is right here. They tapped into the main line before it reaches the meter. Pretty sophisticated stuff. A curtain twitched in the front window of the blue house. Marcus caught a glimpse of white hair and a concerned face peering out at them. "We need to knock on that door," Tony said, standing and brushing off his knees. "This isn't something you can just fix quietly. These people have been getting robbed for months." Marcus's hands were shaking as they walked up the front steps. The woman who answered the door was small and elderly, probably in her 80s, with kind eyes magnified by thick glasses. She wore a purple cardigan and gripped the doorframe with arthritic hands. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Her voice was soft, but wary. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Chen. I live in the rental house behind you." He gestured toward his property. "And this is my cousin Tony. He's an electrician. We think we discovered a problem with your electricity." The woman, Mrs. Eleanor Hoffman, according to the name on her mailbox, invited them into her living room. The house was immaculate, but clearly belonged to someone living on a budget. The furniture was decades old but well cared for, and Marcus noticed the thermostat was set to a chilly 62 degrees. "Mrs. Hoffman," Marcus began, his voice thick with guilt, "how you noticed your electric bills being higher than usual over the past few months." Her face immediately clouded with worry. "Oh my, yes. They've been terrible. I called the electric company 3 times, but they said there wasn't anything wrong with the meter. I've been trying to use less electricity, but the bills keep coming in over $300. I don't understand it." Marcus felt like he might vomit. This sweet elderly woman had been rationing her heat and electricity while he soaked in a hot tub powered by her stolen energy. "Mrs. Hoffman, I think someone has been stealing your electricity. My hot tub, the one I thought was connected to my house, it's actually running off your power supply." The color drained from her face. Stealing? But how? Tony explained the illegal wiring setup as gently as possible, but Mrs. Hoffman grew more distressed with each detail. She kept shaking her head and repeating, "I don't understand. Who would do such a thing?" "I need you to know that I had no idea," Marcus said urgently. "I would never knowingly steal from you or anyone else. My landlord told me the hot tub was already set up and included with the rental. I thought it was legitimate." Mrs. Hoffman studied his face carefully. Despite her age, her eyes were sharp and assessing. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. "I believe you, dear. You seem like a good person. But this is very upsetting. Those electric bills. I've been eating less so I could afford them. I thought maybe my old appliances were finally dying." The guilt hit Marcus like a physical blow. This woman had been sacrificing meals to pay for his evening relaxation sessions. "Mrs. Hoffman, I'm going to make this right," he said firmly. "I'll pay you back every penny, and I'm going to find out exactly who set this up. This is fraud, and whoever did it is going to face consequences." Tony was examining the electrical connection outside Mrs. Hoffman's house when a car pulled into the driveway. A middle-aged man and woman got out, clearly Mrs. Hoffman's adult children based on their family resemblance. "Mom, what's going on?" the woman asked, her voice immediately defensive as she took in the scene. "Who are these men?" Mrs. Hoffman began to explain, but as the story unfolded, her son's expression grew increasingly hostile. "So you're telling me you've been stealing our mother's electricity for months?" David Hoffman stepped closer to Marcus, his fists clenched. "Do you have any idea what this has cost her? She's been calling us worried sick about these bills." "I didn't know," Marcus began. "That's what they all say," David's sister, Sarah, interrupted. "You expect us to believe you never noticed your electric bill wasn't going up? You never wondered why running a hot tub daily didn't affect your costs?" Marcus realized how his story sounded. Even though it was true, the coincidence seemed too convenient. He was an educated man who worked with technology. How could he not have noticed? "We're calling the police," David announced, pulling out his phone. "This is theft, plain and simple." "Wait," Mrs. Hoffman said quietly, but her voice carried authority. "Let me think about this." As her children argued about legal action and Marcus tried to explain his innocence, one thing became crystal clear. Finding out who was really responsible for this elaborate scam had become more than a matter of clearing his conscience. His reputation, his housing situation, and potentially his freedom now hung in the balance. The trail of stolen electricity had led to Mrs. Hoffman's door. but Marcus suspected it was just the beginning of a much larger and more sinister scheme. The police officer who responded to the Hoffman family's call was Detective Rita Morales, a 20-year veteran who'd seen every type of utility fraud imaginable. She listened to both sides of the story with professional skepticism, taking notes in a worn leather notebook. "Mr. Chen, I understand you're claiming ignorance here, but you're a software developer. You work with technology daily. Are you really telling me you never noticed that your electric bill didn't increase when you started using a hot tub regularly?" Marcus had been dreading this exact question. "I know how it sounds, but honestly, I was so focused on work deadlines I barely looked at my bills. I set up automatic payments when I moved in. The only reason I noticed this month's bill was because it was so shockingly high." Detective Morales turned to Tony. "You're certain about the wiring setup?" "Absolutely. This wasn't some amateur job either. Whoever installed this knew exactly what they were doing. The wire is properly buried, waterproofed, and connected to avoid the electrical meter. This took planning and skill. After taking photos of the illegal connection and gathering contact information from everyone involved, Detective Morales closed her notebook. "Mr. Chen, I'm not arresting you today, but don't leave town. We'll need to investigate this further. In the meantime, that hot tub gets disconnected immediately." As the detective left, David Hoffman stepped close to Marcus. "If you think this is over, you're wrong. My mother is on a fixed income. She's been skipping meals because of these bills. We're going to make sure you pay for every single kilowatt hour you stole." That evening, Marcus sat in his living room staring at a stack of rental documents and feeling overwhelmed. He needed to prove his innocence, but where could he start? His landlord, Rick Castellanos, had seemed legitimate when Marcus signed the lease. The man owned several rental properties around the city and had good online reviews. Marcus pulled up Rick's property management website and began digging deeper. Something about the reviews bothered him. They were almost too perfect, and many seemed to mention the same selling points in similar language. On a hunch, Marcus ran several of the review texts through plagiarism detection software he used for work. Bingo! Multiple reviews were nearly identical, just with minor word changes. The reviews were fake. This discovery led Marcus down a rabbit hole of research. He cross-referenced Rick's rental properties with local utility records, property tax information, and online complaint databases. What he found made his blood run cold. Rick Castellanos owned 12 rental properties in a 6-mile radius. 8 of them advertised included hot tub or spa amenities. Most were situated behind or adjacent to homes owned by elderly residents. Marcus spent the next 2 days conducting what he privately called investigative reconnaissance. He drove past each property, taking photos and notes. At 3 locations, he could clearly see hot tubs or spas in backyards that backed up to neighboring houses. The pattern was becoming undeniable. But Marcus needed more than circumstantial evidence. He needed proof that would satisfy Detective Morales and clear his name. That's when he remembered something from his software development background. Utility companies often had online portals where customers could view detailed usage data. Marcus created a spreadsheet and began tracking electricity usage patterns at addresses surrounding Rick's rental properties. The process was time-consuming and required some creative research techniques, but gradually a clear picture emerged. In every case where Rick's rentals advertised spa amenities, the neighboring properties showed dramatic spikes in electrical usage that corresponded perfectly with rental dates. The increases were typically 200 to 400% above normal consumption, and they occurred with suspicious regularity. Mrs. Hoffman's bills had spiked in October, exactly when Marcus moved in. But looking at historical data, Marcus discovered something even more disturbing. Her electricity costs had been elevated for over 2 years, with brief periods of normal usage that corresponded to times when Rick's rental had been vacant between tenants. This meant Mrs. Hoffman had been subsidizing multiple tenants' hot tub usage for years, not just Marcus's. The total amount stolen from her was likely in the thousands of dollars. Marcus printed out his research and called Detective Morales. "I think I've found something you need to see. This isn't just about my hot tub. This is a systematic fraud operation." When Detective Morales arrived at Marcus's house the next morning, she studied his spreadsheet with growing interest. "This is impressive work, Mr. Chen. But gathering this information yourself, some of these utility records aren't exactly public information." Marcus felt a flicker of panic. "I didn't hack anything illegal. I just used publicly available data and cross-referenced it with property records and—" "Relax." Detective Morales held up a hand. "I'm not questioning your methods. I'm impressed by your thoroughness. This gives us probable cause to get official utility records and possibly search warrants." She looked up from the papers. "If your theory is correct, we're looking at a wire fraud operation that's been running for years, potentially stealing tens of thousands of dollars from elderly victims. Rick Castellanos isn't just a slumlord. He's running a sophisticated criminal enterprise." As Detective Morales gathered Marcus's evidence, he felt the first stirring of hope he'd experienced since this nightmare began. But he also felt something else, a burning anger on behalf of Mrs. Hoffman and the other victims who'd been systematically robbed by someone they trusted as a neighbor. The confrontation with Rick Castellanos was coming, and Marcus intended to be there when it happened. The search warrant for Rick Castellanos' properties was executed at dawn on a rainy Thursday morning. Detective Morales had assembled a team that included utility company investigators, electrical inspectors, and financial crime specialists. Marcus wasn't allowed to participate directly, but he watched from his kitchen window as unmarked cars surrounded the rental house next door. Within hours, the investigation team had uncovered a criminal operation that exceeded even Marcus's worst suspicions. Rick hadn't just been stealing electricity. He'd created an entire shadow network of utility theft that had been operating for over 5 years. Detective Morales called Marcus that afternoon with an update that left him stunned. We found detailed records in Castellanos' home office. This guy kept spreadsheets tracking every property, every illegal connection, and every dollar stolen. He was treating this like a legitimate business. The scope of the operation was staggering. Rick owned 18 rental properties across the metropolitan area, and 14 of them were equipped with illegal utility connections. The scheme wasn't limited to electricity theft either. Several properties had illegal water line taps for pools and hot tubs, and 3 had been stealing natural gas for heating systems. The total amount stolen is approaching $340,000 over 5 years, Detective Morales continued. We've identified 27 victims, most of them elderly homeowners on fixed incomes. Mrs. Hoffman wasn't even the worst case. There's an 89-year-old man whose bills were inflated by over $600 per month for 3 years. Marcus felt sick thinking about the human cost. How did he get away with it for so long? He was smart about victim selection. He targeted older residents who were less likely to question dramatic utility increases, especially if they lived alone. Many of them just assumed their old appliances were failing or that utility rates were rising. And he was careful to space out the installations over several years so no single utility company would notice patterns. The detective paused. There's something else, Marcus. We found communications between Castellanos and several electrical contractors. This wasn't a one-man operation. He had people helping him with the illegal installations and at least 2 utility company employees who were taking bribes to ignore irregularities in meter readings. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Rick had cultivated a network of accomplices that included contractors willing to do illegal electrical work, utility employees who would overlook suspicious usage patterns, and even a property appraiser who helped him identify target victims based on their age and income status. Marcus's phone rang constantly over the next few days as the story broke in local media. The case had everything journalists loved: the villain targeting vulnerable elderly victims, a complex criminal scheme, and an unlikely hero in the form of a software developer who'd accidentally uncovered the whole operation. Computer programmer exposes million-dollar utility theft ring. Read the headline in the Metropolitan Daily newspaper. The article featured interviews with several victims, including Mrs. Hoffman, who had become something of a local celebrity. I'm just grateful that Marcus was honest enough to investigate when he realized what was happening, she told the reporter. A dishonest person would have just enjoyed the free hot tub and kept quiet. The media attention brought unexpected developments. Other victims came forward, including several who hadn't been on Detective Morales' original list. A retired teacher named George Washington had been wondering for 2 years why his electric bills had tripled despite using less energy than ever. A widow named Carmen Rodriguez had taken out a small loan to pay utility bills that she now realized had been inflated by stolen power consumption. Marcus found himself becoming an informal coordinator for the growing group of victims. They began meeting weekly at Mrs. Hoffman's house, sharing information and supporting each other through the legal process. What started as a group of strangers brought together by crime had evolved into a genuine community. The legal proceedings moved quickly once Rick was arrested. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of numerous victims, his defense attorney recommended he accept a plea agreement. Rick pleaded guilty to 18 felony counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and theft of utilities. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims. But the criminal case was only part of the justice process. Marcus had connected the victims with Sarah Chen, no relation, a civil rights attorney who specialized in elder fraud cases. She filed a class action lawsuit not only against Rick, but also against his accomplices and the property management companies that had failed to properly oversee his operations. The goal isn't just financial compensation, Sarah explained to the victim group. We want to make sure this can never happen again. We're pushing for new regulations requiring electrical inspections for all rental properties with amenities like hot tubs, pools, or spa facilities. The restitution process took several months, but eventually every victim received full compensation for their stolen utilities, plus additional damages for the financial hardship they'd endured. Mrs. Hoffman used her settlement to install solar panels on her roof, ensuring she'd never again be vulnerable to utility theft. Marcus's role in the case had completely transformed his relationship with his neighborhood. He was no longer just the quiet software developer who worked from home. He'd become a community advocate and someone his neighbors trusted to fight for what was right. The hot tub that had started the whole ordeal was permanently disconnected and removed from the rental property. Marcus had initially felt sad about losing his evening relaxation ritual, but he discovered something better: the satisfaction of having protected vulnerable people from a predator who had been systematically robbing them for years. As he watched Rick Castellanos being led away in handcuffs on the evening news, Marcus reflected on how a simple electric bill had unraveled an entire criminal enterprise. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected places, like the curiosity of a programmer who refused to accept that his relaxing hot tub soak was too good to be true. 2 years after the hot tub that changed everything was hauled away, Marcus Chen stood before the city council holding a thick folder of research and testimonials. The room was packed with familiar faces. Mrs. Hoffman sat in the front row, flanked by other victims who had become his closest friends and allies. Councilwoman Martinez, members of the council, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the importance of the moment. We're here today to present the Utility Fraud Prevention Act, legislation that could protect thousands of residents from falling victim to schemes like the one that devastated our community. The proposed ordinance was comprehensive, born from hard-won experience and months of collaboration between victims, legal experts, and consumer advocates. It required mandatory electrical inspections for all rental properties with high-energy amenities, established a whistleblower protection program for utility company employees, and created a rapid response system for investigating suspicious usage patterns. Mrs. Hoffman rose slowly to address the council. At age 4, she had become an unlikely activist, speaking at community meetings and lobbying sessions throughout the metropolitan area. 2 years ago, I was ashamed that I'd been fooled by a criminal. I felt stupid for not questioning those terrible electric bills. Her voice was clear and determined. But I learned that shame belongs to the criminals who prey on trust, not their victims. This ordinance will ensure that no other senior citizen has to choose between heating their home and buying groceries because someone is stealing their utilities. The council voted unanimously to adopt the ordinance, making their city the first in the state to implement comprehensive utility fraud protections. Within 6 months, 3 neighboring cities had passed similar legislation, and state lawmakers were drafting broader consumer protection measures based on Marcus's model. The regulatory victory was gratifying, but for Marcus, the most meaningful changes had been personal. The weekly victim support meetings had evolved into a genuine neighborhood association that tackled issues far beyond utility fraud. They organized community garden projects, coordinated care for elderly residents, and established a neighborhood watch program that had reduced petty crime by 40%. Marcus's relationship with Mrs. Hoffman had deepened into something resembling a grandmother-grandson bond. She had taught him to play bridge and introduced him to her book club, while he helped her navigate online banking and social media. Every Sunday, they shared dinner and discussed everything from current events to family stories. "You know, dear," Mrs. Hoffman said one evening as they finished washing dishes together, "I used to think that criminals stealing my electricity was the worst thing that could happen. But it brought you into my life and all these wonderful new friends. Sometimes good things come from bad situations." The financial settlements had allowed several victims to make significant improvements to their lives. George Washington had used his restitution to visit his daughter in Seattle for the first time in 5 years. Carmen Rodriguez had paid off her medical debt and started a small scholarship fund for community college students. Mrs. Hoffman had not only installed solar panels, but had also created a small emergency fund to help neighbors facing utility hardships. Marcus's career had also transformed. His expertise in investigating the utility fraud case had led to consulting opportunities with law enforcement agencies and consumer protection organizations. He now spent half his time developing software and half working as a forensic data analyst specializing in financial crimes against elderly victims. The ironic thing, Marcus told Sarah Chen, the attorney who had handled their class action case, is that I'm making more money helping catch criminals than I ever did just writing code. And that work feels meaningful in a way my old job never did. The ripple effects of the case continued expanding. Detective Morales had been promoted to head a new financial crimes unit focused on elder fraud. 3 other cities had uncovered similar utility theft rings using investigation techniques developed during the Castellanos case. A federal task force was now tracking utility fraud patterns across multiple states. Rick Castellanos remained in federal prison, serving his 8-year sentence. His accomplices had received various punishments ranging from fines to short prison terms. The electrical contractors who had participated in the scheme lost their licenses permanently, and the corrupt utility employees faced both criminal charges and civil penalties. But perhaps the most significant change was the transformation of Marcus's neighborhood from a collection of strangers into a genuine community. The monthly association meetings now drew 50 regular attendees who collaborated on everything from organizing block parties to advocating for better street lighting. On the second anniversary of discovering the illegal hot tub connection, Marcus hosted a barbecue in his backyard. The space where the stolen hot tub had once sat now featured a vegetable garden that supplied fresh produce to several elderly neighbors. Mrs. Hoffman brought her famous potato salad, George Washington grilled hamburgers, and Carmen Rodriguez led the group in a toast. To Marcus, Mrs. Hoffman announced, raising her glass of lemonade, who proved that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, can change everything. As the sun set over the neighborhood that had become his chosen family, Marcus reflected on how a shocking electric bill had led him to discover not just a criminal scheme, but also his own capacity for leadership and community building. The hot tub powered by theft had been removed, but the connections it helped forge, bonds of trust, friendship, and shared purpose, would last a lifetime. The energy tax that had once drained resources from vulnerable neighbors had been replaced by a different kind of energy, the power of people working together to protect and support each other. And that energy, Marcus had learned, was infinitely renewable.